Yeah.
We didn't just start a sport, it was a whole movement.
Metal Mulisha was the brand. If you knew anything about motorcycles, it was Metal Mulisha.
Can you imagine if Metal Mulisha was still on Star?
Gonna be no Metal Mulisha ever again?
What started as a tight-knit crew of outsiders rejected by the corporate world of motocross quickly exploded into one of the most recognizable brands in action sports history. Metal Mulisha wasn't just a freestyle crew, it was a revolution.
Big influence in changing the whole motorcycle culture and way of life.
That Metal Mulisha compasses, he is that guy.
They built a brand on pushing the boundaries. From blacked-out gear, skull logos, and a rebellious attitude, they flipped the industry on its head. They weren't just riding, they were redefining what motocross could be. Metal Mulisha were doing things the industry said couldn't or shouldn't be done. But destruction was built into their DNA. They didn't just take risks on the track, they lived recklessly off of it. The crashes got worse, the parties got wilder, and the crew started to unravel. Some walked away, some spiraled out, and others paid the ultimate price. Their reign didn't just fade, it detonated. Brian Deegan and Larry Link Ogle weren't just outsiders in motocross. They were walking middle fingers to everything the industry stood for. In a sport that catered to polished, media-trained racers backed by corporate sponsors, Deegan and Link Ogle were the exact opposite. Rough around the edges, tatted up, and unapologetically defiant, they clashed with the buttoned-up, corporate-driven world of professional racing. Deegan had skill, no doubt about it, but he wasn't the kind of rider big teams wanted. His attitude was too wild, too unpredictable. Link Ogle, even worse. He wasn't just against the system, he wanted to burn it down. They weren't the golden boys of motocross. They were the rejects, the guys nobody believed in, and the industry made sure they felt it. Then came 1997. Deegan lined up for the 125cc main event in Los Angeles, and when he won, he didn't just celebrate, he made history. Instead of rolling through the finish like a good company man, he ghost rode his bike across the line.
Goes down, the checkered flag, and Deegan lets his bike fly into the air, standing with his arms in the air.
The crowd erupted. The industry was horrified. Deegan didn't care. That moment didn't just get him noticed. It put the whole motocross world on edge. But no matter how much fans loved them, the industry wasn't budging. The big teams weren't interested in rebels. The sponsors didn't want riders they couldn't control. Racing at the highest level was expensive. And without corporate backing, Deegan and Link Ogle were stuck in a brutal cycle. Good enough to compete, but never given the chance to truly succeed. The message was clear. If they weren't willing to play the game, they weren't getting a seat at the table. So, they stopped trying. Instead of chasing a dream that didn't want them, they turned to something else. Something raw, untamed, and completely their own. They took their bikes to the hills, launching off cliffs, inventing new tricks, and carving out a space where the industry's rules didn't apply. The same attitude that got them blacklisted in racing was about to make them legends. By the late 90s, Deegan and the riders who would become Metal Mulisha were done with the politics of motocross. They didn't need starting gates, sponsors breathing down their necks, or factory teams calling the shots. All they needed was a dirt bike, a wide-open stretch of land, and a crew just as reckless as they were. While the rest of the motocross world was obsessed with lap times and sponsorship deals, Deegan and his crew were out in the hills, sending massive jumps. It was raw, dangerous, and unpredictable. Nobody knew if they'd land or if they'd be getting carried out in a stretcher. That was the point. Crusty Demons of Dirt started the freestyle movement. This underground video series didn't just capture the riding, it captured the attitude. The footage wasn't polished. It wasn't a highlight reel of podium speeches and factory team press conferences. It was pure anarchy. Guys launching 100-foot jumps with no landing zones, cops showing up to shut down riding spots, and nights that blurred into mornings fueled by adrenaline and alcohol. It was raw, it was real, and it sold millions of copies. By the late 90s, freestyle motocross, FMX, was no longer just a sideshow. It was a movement. Deegan and his crew weren't just making a name for themselves. They were about to change motocross forever. By the early 2000s, freestyle motocross had taken over action sports. What started as a few riders launching off dirt hills for fun had exploded into a global phenomenon, one that was being broadcasted to millions. And right in the middle of the mayhem was Metal Mulisha. They weren't just another group of riders trying to make a name for themselves. They were FMX. At every major competition, Metal Mulisha riders weren't just there to ride, they were there to dominate. X Games, Gravity Games, Red Bull X Fighters. Wherever there was an FMX contest, Metal Mulisha showed up ready to tear the place apart. In 2002, Mike Metzger made history when he landed the first back-to-back backflips at the X Games.
First hit, 45 feet. Second hit, 80 feet. The confidence, the timing.
Sending the crowd into a frenzy and proving that the trick wasn't just possible, it was the future. Meanwhile, guys like Ronnie Feist, Jeremy Twitch Stenberg, and Bo Manley were pushing limits in competitions and free-riding sessions that didn't even make it to TV. But Metal Mulisha's impact wasn't just about what they did, it was how they did it. They were loud, aggressive, and completely unapologetic. If they didn't like a judge's score, they let them know, right to their face. They brought an energy to FMX that had never been seen before. Even outside of competition, the Mulisha kept their name in the headlines. They weren't just riding, they were throwing parties that would put rock stars to shame. If there was a Metal Mulisha event, you could bet there would be fights, arrests, and enough chaos to make mainstream media lose their minds. And that's exactly what made them legends. Metal Mulisha was untouchable until it wasn't. The same reckless energy that fueled its rise was the same force that sent it spiraling. The brutal nature of freestyle motocross, the all-or-nothing lifestyle, and the chaos within the crew all played a role in its collapse. FMX wasn't just about progression, it was survival. Every year, jumps got bigger, tricks got riskier, and the margin for error shrank. Pushing limits wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about staying alive. Larry Link Ogle, one of the original minds behind the Metal Mulisha, nearly paid the ultimate price. In 2001, a crash left him in a coma. He survived, but the scars, mental and physical, never fully faded. Then came the losses that shook the sport. Jeremy Lusk's tragic accident in 2009 was a sobering reminder that FMX was playing with fire. Riders weren't just breaking bones, they were putting their lives on the line every time they threw a leg over the bike. The injuries stacked up. Even the toughest riders had limits. The ones who weren't sidelined by broken bodies were watching their friends drop out one by one. Some could still ride, but the price of staying in the game was getting too high. The core group that built Metal Mulisha was starting to fade. With success came money, and with money came excess. Metal Mulisha had built its reputation on being the wildest, rowdiest crew in action sports. But what started as post-contest celebrations turned into full-blown mayhem. After parties blurred into the next morning, fights broke out at events, and the off-track chaos started catching up with them. For some, painkillers weren't just for injuries anymore.
You know, I went home, I got weeded that night. 2 days later, my best friend OD'd in my truck, and my addiction was so bad that, you know, I took his pills after he died.
It was that bad?
It was that bad, and it was, you know, it's sad to say, my life was that bad.
Wrecking, rehabbing, and riding again became a cycle that was hard to escape. A few riders went down the rabbit hole, numbing the pain of their battered bodies and the pressure of staying relevant. The same fearlessness that made them legends on the bike made them reckless off of it. Some cleaned up and walked away. Others weren't so lucky. The destruction was no longer just happening on the track. It was happening behind closed doors. Metal Mulisha wasn't built for corporate boardrooms. It was built in the dirt, by riders who lived and breathed rebellion. But as the brand grew, so did the tensions. What started as a tight-knit brotherhood began to fracture under the weight of money, sponsorships, and conflicting visions.
For Mulisha, 2010. I think like the end of 2010.
Was that just a personal decision?
No, it was a fuck you decision. Like I was working on a TV show and Brian wasn't stoked on it.
I remember that.
Yeah, ended up trying to take it from me. And then I was just kind of like, you're supposed to be my friend. Like, why the fuck would you go behind my back and try to take this from me? You know?
Brian Deegan saw an opportunity to take Metal Mulisha to the next level. Bigger deals, mainstream exposure, and expansion beyond just freestyle motocross. But not everyone was on board. Larry Link Ogle, one of the brand's original driving forces, wanted to keep it raw and underground. To him, the Mulisha wasn't just a company, it was a way of life that wasn't meant to be packaged for the masses. The power struggle was unavoidable. Link Ogle's departure marked one of the first major cracks in the foundation. Others followed, either walking away or getting pushed out. What had once been a group of like-minded misfits riding for the love of it had turned into something different. The industry had forced them to choose, evolve, or hold their ground. And not everyone agreed on the answer. The same energy that made them unstoppable was now tearing them apart. The infighting wasn't just costing friendships, it was costing Metal Mulisha its identity. As the crew fractured, the brand started to drift from what made it special. The rebellion was losing its fire. and fans could feel it. Metal Mulisha wasn't just a name, it was a movement, a brand built on adrenaline, defiance, and a complete disregard for authority. It was the uniform of rebellion, the go-to symbol for anyone who lived fast and didn't care who was watching. But chaos doesn't stay chaos forever, and when Metal Mulisha got too big, the rebellion started to fade. At its peak, Metal Mulisha was everywhere. It wasn't just in the motocross pits or at FMX contests. It was in mall stores, department chains, and slapped on the backs of kids who had never even seen a dirt bike in real life. The same brand that once represented anti-establishment chaos had become a mainstream commodity. It had gone from outlaw to oversized retail display. The fans saw it happening. They weren't just supporting a brand, they were part of something bigger. But the moment that identity became mass-produced, something changed. What was once a symbol of defiance started feeling like just another corporate logo. Freestyle motocross was built on pushing limits, breaking rules, and doing the impossible. In the late 90s and early 2000s, that meant launching off cliffs, landing never-before-seen tricks, and riding with a who-cares-if-we-die mentality. That was the Metal Mulisha way. But by the mid-2000s teens, FMX had changed. Tricks got more technical. Contests became more structured. Sponsors wanted clean-cut, polished athletes who fit the new corporate-friendly image of the sport. The outlaw mentality that Metal Mulisha thrived on, it didn't fit anymore. Suddenly, new FMX stars weren't repping Metal Mulisha gear. The younger generation wasn't connecting with the brand like their predecessors had. The sport cleaned up, but Metal Mulisha didn't. What had once been the face of freestyle motocross now felt like a relic of a wilder time. And when the next wave of athletes and fans came up, Metal Mulisha wasn't part of their world anymore. The rebellion had turned into a business, and businesses don't stay on top forever. Metal Mulisha was never just a clothing brand. It was an attitude, an identity, a movement. But rebellion isn't something you can package and sell forever. The moment the movement became a corporation, the foundation started to crack. The brand didn't disappear overnight, but the writing was on the wall. Freestyle moved on. The industry changed. The fans who once lived and breathed Metal Mulisha grew up, found new idols, or left the sport entirely. But Metal Mulisha did something few brands could ever claim. It burned fast, burned bright, and left a mark that can't be erased.
Founded very influential brands, including Life's a Beach, Bad Boy Club, No Fear.
In the mid-1990s, there was one logo you couldn't escape. It was on the back window of pickup trucks, on helmets, on t-shirts. Sometimes it was just a slogan. Second place is the first loser. No Fear wasn't just a brand, it was a uniform. The company that built its identity on pushing limits, risking everything and refusing to slow down, didn't fail because they played it safe. They failed because they never lifted their foot off the gas. This is a brand that went from selling t-shirts out of a trunk to generating hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Bold enough to turn down Nike. Run by twin brothers who would fist fight in board meetings, wipe the blood off, and then go grab lunch like nothing happened. This isn't just the story of a clothing company. It's the story of motocross, the chaos of the 1990s, and how an idea scribbled on a wall became a global empire, and then ran it straight into the ground. To understand the rocket ship that was No Fear, you have to look at the launch pad. And that launch pad was built on failure. Our story starts way before the Angry Eyes logo. It starts in the early 80s with three guys from Illinois, Mark Simo, Brian Simo, and a guy named Jeff Theodosakis, who everyone just called Beaver. These guys weren't fashion moguls, they were motocross rats. They were chasing the dream, living out of vans and trying to scrape together enough cash to make it to the next race in Florida.
The Wisconsin areas where I started in dirt bikes in the early years when it was kind of a really obscure sport.
In 1984, the Florida motocross scene is hot, but the fashion, not so much. The guys are looking around and seeing everyone wearing these short, tight shorts. You know the ones. 1-inch inseams, basically underwear. And these Illinois boys are thinking, there's no way we're wearing those. They go to Beaver's girlfriend, who has a sewing machine, and they ask her to make them some shorts that actually go down to their knees.
We wanted to have some long, baggy, really bright, obnoxious kind of stuff.
She uses whatever fabric she can find. Old curtains, tablecloths, crazy patterns.
So it was anything from tablecloths to fabric. We drove down to Miami during that whole, that was the 80s. That was a cocaine cowboys era.
Suddenly, they're walking around in the pits in these baggy, knee-length, wild pattern shorts. People look at them like they've lost their minds, but then, a funny thing happens. People started asking where they can get a pair.
She made us a couple of pairs, and people started asking for them. We said, hey, we might be able to make enough money to get home.
They sell a few. Then they sell a few more.
And she made us 50 pairs, and within an hour we sold them up, walking up and down the beach, and didn't get dressed. And so it's like, this is better than working.
They realized they can make more money selling shorts on the beach than they can racing dirt bikes. They call the brand Life's a Beach. But the moment that changed everything, the moment that proves marketing is more about attitude than budget, it's the Gainesville National in 1984. Rick Johnson sees the guys selling these shorts out of a U-Haul trailer. He thinks they look cool. He grabs a pair of tiger stripe shorts.
Rick Johnson saw them because we had this black and blue tiger stripe pattern. And he walks up and he goes, hey, I want to get a pair of those shorts.
Now, normally, you wear your gear. You look professional. But RJ goes to his team manager and asks if he can wear these beach shorts over his motocross pants during the race. His manager tells him, if you win the first moto, you can do whatever the hell you want.
Kenny Clark's like, hey, dude, you win, you can do whatever you want.
So RJ goes out and wins the first moto. For the second moto, the crowd sees Rick Johnson lining up at the gate wearing teal blue tiger stripe board shorts over his riding gear. It shouldn't have worked. It shouldn't have happened. But the crowd lost their minds. He gets the whole shot, and even though his shock blows up later in the race, the damage is done. Fans are sprinting from the fences to the U-Haul trailer. They sell out of everything instantly. Life's a Beach explodes.
He was the first real marketing opportunity that I had, and he was amazing.
They create the Bad Boy Club. They create a movement. They're making millions. But remember, these are young guys having a blast, not accountants.
A new name had to come up, and sort of Bad Boy Club was kind of came to mind. Just kind of the theme of kind of being a badass was.
They grow too fast. They run out of cash. They get into a bad licensing deal to save the company, and long story short, they lose it all. They walk away from their first empire with nothing, zero. But as they left the lawyer's office, stripped of the company they built, the attorney told Mark Simo something profound. He said, "You're the most powerful guy in the room now. You've got nothing, so that means you've got nothing to lose." Mark went home and told his brother Brian, "We can do anything we want. We're the most dangerous guys out there. We've got nothing to lose." And that is a dangerous mindset. As the decade turned, everything was about to change. The Simo brothers and Marty Moats, a legend who won the USGP at Carlsbad, are living in a warehouse. They were broke. Beds were nothing more than empty shelves meant for fabric rolls. Their shower was a hose on the wall. But they had an idea. They need a new brand, something that captures that nothing-to-lose attitude. They had a graphic artist named Mark Boga. He was a genius, but he was also battling some serious demons. One day, fueled by some heavy drugs, Boga takes a red paintbrush and paints 2 words on the wall of the art room. No fear. Mark Simo sees it. He stops. He stares at it. He says, "That kind of looks cool." They didn't have a business plan. They didn't have a focus group. They just had a slogan painted by a guy on a bender. Mark prints up a few t-shirts with "No Fear" on the back. He wears one to the Dallas airport, and he notices people walking behind him, reading his shirt out loud. That was the spark. But the explosion? That came from the most unlikely place you could imagine. By the early 1990s, Los Angeles was a powder keg. Tensions are high. The rapper Ice-T releases a controversial song called "Cop Killer." The media is in a frenzy. Ice-T goes on CNN for an interview and the entire country is watching. And what's he wearing? He's wearing a black hat with "No Fear" embroidered on it. The Simo brothers had nothing to do with it.
Ice-T went on CNN wearing a No Fear hat. I don't know where he got it.
They didn't know Ice-T. They didn't send him the hat. But suddenly, No Fear wasn't just a surf or moto brand. It was the voice of rebellion. It was the voice of the streets. In 1 year, sales exploded by over $100 million. They couldn't print shirts fast enough. They were buying every blank t-shirt in California. Mark Simo had to fly to Hanes, the underwear company, and beg the CEO for 1 million shirts a month. The CEO looked at him like he was crazy, but he agreed.
"I need 1 million t-shirts.
Wow.
I need them like right now."
Yeah.
He goes, "Oh, we can do that." And I'm waiting for him to say, "Hey, we need financial statements." We didn't even ask me. He just sent me 1 million t-shirts.
Wow.
No Fear became a cultural tidal wave. You saw the stickers on lifted trucks. You saw them on flood victims' houses on the news. You saw NFL players like Tom Rathman and Brett Favre wearing the stickers on their helmets and paying the fines because they didn't care.
Brett Favre came in and he put No Fear in his turtleneck. And, on football games, John Madden's circling the No Fear sticker on the back of some players.
The office culture was pure, unadulterated chaos. Imagine a workplace where the owners, identical twins, would get into screaming matches that turned into physical fistfights in front of the sales team. Employees would be terrified, thinking the company was over. Then, 5 minutes later, Mark and Brian would walk out, straighten their shirts, and say, "Hey, let's go get lunch." They had a sand pit in the parking lot for parties. They hired KC and the Sunshine Band for a company bash. They were living the lifestyle they sold. They were authentic. And that authenticity is what attracted the athletes who would take the brand to the stratosphere. While the t-shirts were making millions in the mall, something arguably more important was happening on the track. Jeff Surwall, a former pro racer, was running the sports marketing division. He looked at the motocross gear on the market and thought it was stale. It was boring. He wanted to make No Fear distinct. But he had a problem. The biggest name in the sport, Jeremy McGrath, was with Fox Racing. McGrath was the king of Supercross. He was untouchable. But in 1998, McGrath is making a massive career change. He's leaving the factory Suzuki team to ride for Yamaha, and he decides he wants to ride Supercross only. Fox Racing had a clause in his contract that said if he changed his schedule significantly, they could renegotiate. This was the opening No Fear needed. Jeff Surwall and Jeremy McGrath struck a deal. But it wasn't just a sponsorship. McGrath became a partner in the No Fear MX gear division. This was huge. The Michael Jordan of motocross now owned a piece of the company he rode for. Then they went after the future. There was this 15-year-old kid named Travis Pastrana. He was a phenom, but he had just broken himself in half. He was in a wheelchair after a freestyle crash so violent it tore his pelvis apart and left doctors unsure if he'd even walk again. People thought his career might be over before it started. Most sponsors backed off. Fox Racing basically told him, "We'll wait and see if you can walk again." But No Fear? Jeff Surwall called Travis. McGrath called Travis. They told him, "We believe in you. You're the guy we want."
We're into the Jeremy McGrath era, and
Right.
Travis Pastrana era,
Right.
you know, and other guys in the motorsport side.
Totally.
You know, and we'd attracted a lot of different people from corporate boardrooms to professional athletes.
They offered him the biggest contract for a 125cc rider ever, while he was still sitting in a wheelchair. When Travis healed up and won Loretta Lynn's, Fox came crawling back with a blank check and a Corvette signing bonus. Travis's dad looked the Fox rep in the eye and said, "You didn't believe in him when he was down. No Fear did." And they walked out. That created the dream team: Jeremy McGrath, Travis Pastrana, Kevin Windham, Sebastian Tortelli. Their influence stretched far beyond motocross. No Fear built rosters in BMX, skateboarding, surfing, and wakeboarding. They even sponsored fights in the early days of the UFC. You saw their logo at backyard wood ramps and major surf contests. It was on trucks at desert races and jackets at UFC weigh-ins. For a key stretch, No Fear was the attitude brand for all of action sports. If you were pushing a limit, you likely wore the eyes. The gear they created was revolutionary. Before No Fear, jerseys were basically heavy cotton sweaters that weighed 10 pounds when they got wet. No Fear introduced technical fabrics, vented mesh, and crazy designs. Remember the 2000 season? Anaheim won. Surwall made a special run of gear just for that race. He put Travis Pastrana in neon yellow and Kevin Windham in full camo. They went out for the parade lap, Travis doing Indian airs, Kevin doing those beautiful whips, and the crowd went nuts. They made 500 sets of that gear to sell on Monday. All 500 sets were gone by 9 a.m., the fastest sellout they'd ever seen. No Fear wasn't just a logo anymore. It was the coolest equipment in the sport. They were selling 50,000 helmets a year. They were rivaling the giants. But when you're flying that high, the air gets thin. And the Simo brothers were about to make some decisions that would leave everyone scratching their heads. You have to understand the mindset of Mark and Brian Simo. They were racers. They wanted to win, but they also wanted to be big shots. They started pouring money into car racing. Not just sponsoring a car, but owning race teams. Boris Said, the famous road racer, was practically living with them. They were burning cash on NASCAR trucks and Trans Am cars.
I met him. I started racing. I missed racing dirt bikes. My buddy Beaver, I mentioned, my buddy with the big teeth, got me started in cars as a...
But the biggest gamble wasn't racing. It was the energy drink. No Fear launched No Fear Energy in the early 2000s. They went straight after Monster and Rockstar. For a moment, it worked. You saw the cans in 7-Eleven coolers. They were at every motocross and freestyle event. Then reality hit. The energy drink business was brutal. Distribution costs were massive. Securing shelf space was a war. Monster's momentum became unstoppable. No Fear poured millions into the fight. They tried to keep pace. The cash drain was enormous. What began as a major expansion became a heavy anchor that pulled the company down. Then came the phone call that could have changed history. Mark Simo gets a call from Phil Knight, the head of Nike, the man who built the biggest sports brand in the world.
You told me that you had a conversation with Phil Knight at one point.
Yeah. During the run-up years, and in particular, we were getting some attention, I guess, because we ended up on the field in places we didn't expect to be on, athletes. And
Nike's interested. They see No Fear as the next big thing. They want to buy the brand. They want to integrate it into the Nike machine. For most business owners, this is the exit strategy. This is the buy a private island moment. Mark Simo meets with him, but he starts thinking about his employees. He has factories in California. He has sewers, cutters, screen printers. He knows that if Nike buys them, they'll likely shut down the local operations and streamline everything. He can't bring himself to fire the people who helped build the brand. So, he says no. He walks away from Nike. And to this day, some of the people who were there will tell you, if they'd sold, No Fear wouldn't have been No Fear anymore. In hindsight, Mark admits this was one of his greatest regrets, because if you don't join the giant, you end up fighting it. And No Fear decided they could become the next Nike on their own. They tried to do everything. They launched No Fear shoes, but they didn't know how to make shoes. They made a mechanic shoe with a tread pattern that looked like a motocross tire. It looked cool, but there was a design flaw. The rubber knobbies provided zero grip on the aluminum floors of race trailers. Mechanics were slipping and sliding all over the place. Then, they tried golf. Yes, golf. They hired motocross legend Brock Glover to run No Fear Golf. The idea was to bring attitude to the country club. Brock spent months building a business plan, lining up pro shops, and promising exclusivity. He told the golf pros, "We won't sell this in discount stores. This is premium." He comes into the warehouse on a Monday morning ready to launch. He looks at the shelves where the inventory was stored. It's gone. Empty. He rushes to Mark and Brian's office. "Where's the golf gear?" Brian Simo looks at him and says, "Oh, I saw that stuff sitting there, so I sold it to JCPenney." Brock was stunned. They had just undercut their entire strategy for a quick buck. They sold premium golf gear to a discount department store. It killed the credibility of the golf line instantly. This was the beginning of the end. The organized chaos was becoming just chaos. Before the downturn hit, No Fear made a massive push into mall retail. At their peak, they had over 100 stores. These were huge spaces with floor-to-ceiling graphics and attitude slogans on every wall. It was a bold move, but an expensive one. Rent was high, inventory had to be deep, the stores grew faster than the brand could support. What worked as a cultural symbol didn't always work for an everyday retail customer. When foot traffic slowed and online shopping rose, those long-term leases became a financial time bomb. They were expanding into retail stores at the exact moment the economy was getting shaky and the internet was taking off. They were signing long-term leases on expensive mall locations. And then, the cultural shift happened. You know a trend is over when South Park makes fun of it. In an episode of South Park, they showed a lifted truck with a massive No Fear sticker on the back. It became a punchline. It wasn't rebellious anymore. It was a cliche for overcompensating. The cool kids moved on. The moms at JCPenney were buying the shirts now. And once your mom's wearing it, the cool factor is dead. The revenue started to drop. The cash flow dried up. The hole in the elevator shaft where they kept the money was suddenly empty. The slow decline of business is painful, but the story of No Fear has a much darker chapter. Marty Moats, the third partner, the man who was the glue in the early days, the legend who was the first American to win the USGP at Carlsbad. Marty was suffering. He had old injuries. He was in pain. In 2006, the pressure and the pain became too much. Marty Moats took his own life. It shattered the group. These guys were brothers, partners, and best friends. The fun, the parties, the fistfights, it all seemed trivial compared to the loss of Marty. The business limped along for a few more years. Jeff Sirwall eventually saw the writing on the wall. He tried to tell the Simo brothers that the retail stores were a mistake, that the brand was losing its way, but they were locked in. Sirwall managed to separate the moto division for a while, keeping the gear cool even when the t-shirt business tanked. He eventually bought Jeremy McGrath out of his ownership stake. A messy situation where business got in the way of friendship for a few years. Finally, in February 2011, the ride came to a stop. Mark Simo issued a press release announcing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company that generated hundreds of millions of dollars, the company that defined 90s attitude, was sold off. It was bought by a UK retailer, Sports Direct, and turned into just another logo on a discount rack. So, what's the legacy of No Fear? It's easy to see the bankruptcy and call it a failure, to point at the shoes, the golf line, the stores, and say they messed up. These guys never wanted to build some safe corporate machine. They wanted to live the words on their shirts. They hired their friends. They backed the sports they loved before anyone else did. They bet on a kid in a wheelchair named Travis Pastrana. For a few years, they were the coolest company on the planet. They caught lightning in a bottle. Then they drank it, smashed the glass. Did they run it into the ground? Sure. Jeremy McGrath said it himself. They just ran it too long. When you build everything around having nothing to lose, eventually you run out of places to go. The warehouses are empty now. The fights are over. But if you dig through an old closet and find a shirt with those angry eyes on it, that's not just old clothing. That's a souvenir from the wildest party motocross has ever seen. But No Fear didn't disappear entirely. No Fear gear started showing up again, quietly at first, on tracks and pits and across social feeds. It's not the cultural takeover it once was, and it may never be. But for the first time in years, No Fear isn't just something people remember, it's something people are wearing again. What's your core memory of No Fear? Was it the McGrath jersey, the sticker on your first truck, or maybe that one shirt with the slogan "Your principal made you turn inside out"? Let us know in the comments below. I read all of them, and I want to hear your stories. And if you want to see how other motocross brands rose, fell, or survived that same era, there's more waiting for you right here. Thanks for watching, and stay wicked.